Hello and welcome. My name is Kim Denyas and you're on my channel where I'm going to explore books. And the first book is going to be parts of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. And our brothers and sisters that are Jewish would call it the Hebrew Bible, and those of us in Christianity name it the Old Testament. So these short videos are going to examine God. We're going to kind of look at God maybe in some different ways. We're going to look at how God interacts with his beloved people, the Jews. And we're also going to watch and walk with them as they struggle to obey what God's asked them to do. You're going to find yourself, I think, in these stories. I know I certainly do. And I find those men and women that I walk with, I find our struggles are very similar to what we see thousands of years ago. I invite you to come and connect, explore, maybe even examine and be stretched into some additional understandings of God. Perhaps like me, your life has allowed you to have some experiences that bring you to a new place in God. And I think that's what we see with these stories and with this text. So by way of background, the Bible, the Old Testament, is 39 books for Protestants. 39. We sometimes call it a canon because it's a collection, and that's what the word canon means. We're looking at Noah and the Ark. If you know that story, that was around 2400 BC, before the birth of Christ. So that's kind of the oldest event outside of creation. And then the first penned story, the first story they believe to have been put to parchment or whatever paper it was at that point, is probably Job, which is around 2100 BC. And the youngest book is Malachi. So Malachi was about 400 years before the birth of Christ. The Jewish canon ends with 2 Chronicles. And so it's an interesting compare and contrast exercise if you'd be wanting something to do, to take a look at 2 Chronicles, the last chapter, and read that and think and wonder what they're saying with ending the book there, ending the canon there. And then jump to Malachi and maybe read the whole thing because it's not very long, and consider what our position as Christians, what we might be saying by ending the book there. By the way, reading the Bible is a really new concept. Until the 1400s, the Bible was not printed. In the 1400s, when the printing press came into play, was the first time more common people would have had access to this printed word. Prior to that, it was the scholars, it was the ministers, the ultra-rich maybe would have had one in their library or portions of it in their library. But the idea of studying it personally and reading it for your own enjoyment, again, a really new concept. Now, I want you to imagine with me, if we can go back prior to this text, prior to, of course, the printing press and all the rest, how would our forefathers, our foremothers, have known God? Because certainly God existed before we had the Bible. And I love a verse in Romans 1:20 that says that they understood God by what God created. It's a beautiful little passage that just kind of points that all of nature, all that we see, can point us to God and expand our understanding of God. And then if there's a lovely little poetic, although it's not very poetic in English, but in Hebrew it is quite beautiful, Proverbs 8:22 through 32. We have wisdom, and she is always a woman in Proverbs. Sophia in the Greek is her name, and she talks about where she was with God before creation. It's lovely. She writes about them being playmates and delighting in each other's company. So that's Proverbs 8:22 through 32, if that's of interest to you. So let's dive into perhaps the first question my students want to know when we're working together. Is this a history book? Are these things historically accurate? That's a very fair question. And so my answer is always yes and no. Um, we need to remember winners write history. We also need to consider that the idea of writing history is, again, a relatively modern concept. The scribes that were penning these words perhaps had no idea that you and I would be reading them 4,000 years later, 3,000 years later. So let's just consider we're at 2021 right now. Imagine what is being written from this time period that would be of interest, that would have any effect on how people live in, well, let's just say 4,021, 6,021. What will the world be like? That's kind of where we are at times with this text, is we bring our modern minds to it, but it's ancient times. So we're always kind of juggling that a little bit. There's a little inner tension for us as we look at these things. But here's what we know from our scholars from the Old Testament, okay? We know that some of the kings of Israel and some of the events mentioned line up historically. Those dates can be confirmed elsewhere, which is how that works. We know there were a group of people in Egypt called Hebrews, and that's the Exodus they're going to take. We also know that there were Jews in Babylon, and that's also in the text. So we've kind of got some anchors there. What hasn't yet been found is evidence, material evidence of 1 million people marching around the wilderness as it's described in the Exodus for 40 years. That many people, that long a time period, there would be evidence. We don't have that yet. And I say yet because, the Dead Sea Scrolls are relatively new, so in the last, there still could be more to come. That's, I guess, what I'm saying. But the real question, I guess, and I typically pose this to my students is, does your faith need the Bible to be historically accurate? So let me say that again. Does your faith, does your ability to believe these stories or mine out of them lessons for yourself and your walk with God, does it need it to be historically accurate? I would encourage you to answer no, it doesn't. Because these stories still invite us to know God, to believe in God. We get to see the individuals working that out. We get to see God at work with them. That still points to divineness and holiness in my book. And perhaps like me, you were raised with a really clear message about who God is and who God isn't. And then as you've matured and grown up and changed and life has happened and happened and happened, maybe that idea of God began to crumble. I frequently say God has never been interested in any box I've created for God. Does that resonate with you? God's never, ever been interested in the boxes I created for God. And my life experiences have been what's helped me crumble those. You're invited, just like I am, to live into the question of who is God. Come curious. Come be excited to see how God moves, works, loves, draws you, draws me to God. Come even be challenged in how this God might be at work in your life today. See, wherever we are in this relationship with God, I believe these words point us continually to God. And I know God seeks to be in relationship with you and with me. So here's how I view the Hebrew Bible. And here's how I'll attempt to ascribe some meaning to it and reveal the faith of those who lived beyond these pages and in these pages. I don't think this text explains God, but these stories point us to God. At times we think we're looking behind the scenes a little bit. Studied closely, the text does reveal God, and we'll explore this. We'll see God at work. We'll see what God likes, what God dislikes, even hates. We're going to see when God has human tendencies like jealousy and loving the smell of cooked meat. And we're going to see when God acts like a God and kills where you and I don't maybe understand killing. We're going to see God as king, warrior, parent, disappointed parent. We're going to see God as sage. We're going to see passages that contradict each other. We're going to see a wonderful story about people. I hope you see yourself in these pages. I hope you see their God and your God. And I hope you come and struggle and learn and love into more of God. If you would like to reach me, my website is kimdenius.com. And it's always good to subscribe and like this if it was helpful to you. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you real soon. Bye-bye.